India's super rich have become richer, its poor have become poorer. Inequality is worsening at a frightening level. So says the international NGO Oxfam's Global Inequality Report 2019. The report presents some shocking statistics that the top 1% of India's richest got richer by 39% in 2018. The top 10% hold a whopping 77.4% of India's wealth, whereas the bottom 60% holds just 4.8% of India's wealth. This is probably the most jarring bit of all, that the 9 richest Indians together have the same wealth as the bottom 50% of the population. Here we're talking about close to 600 crore people. Now, the report also says if the richest 1% paid just 0.5% more tax, then, for instance, the government's health budget could go up by 50%. Tonight, we'll take a closer look at that report and why bridging this rising income gap doesn't seem to be a bigger priority for this government, especially in an election year. First, my colleague Vishnu Shom has more details of that Oxfam report, which was released at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
The World Economic Forum in Davos is all about a meeting of some of the world's most powerful leaders, a meeting of some of the world's richest individuals. But in as much as the World Economic Forum looks at wealth, the global spread of wealth, and how individual countries are doing, it's also about realizing that that wealth is not evenly spread out. And that's what Oxfam, with its Global Inequality Report, has pointed out lucidly once again. First, a look at the global level before I give you specifics of the situation in India. In 2018, 26 people now own the same wealth as the 3.8 billion people who make up the poorest half of humanity. That's down from 44 people last year. The world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, saw his fortune increase to $112 billion. Just 1% of his fortune is the equivalent to the whole health budget of Ethiopia, a country with 115 million people. But let's look at India. Let's look at India quite specifically. And these are numbers which will stun you. India's top 10% holds 77.4% of the total national wealth. The contrast is even sharper for the top 1% that holds 51.53% of the national wealth. I'm actually reading from the report. This is what they've come out with. The bottom 60% of the majority of India's population owns merely 4.8% of the national wealth in India. And what's equally startling is that India is part of the Global Gender Gap Index. India has fared very, very poorly in this. And this is all a part of the Global Inequality Report, a report that looks not just at fame and fortune and how some have it and some don't, but also what constitutes the impact of that Global Inequality Report. In Davos, Switzerland, with Kshitij Gupta, Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
Well, joining us on Reality Check tonight, Ranu Bhogal, Director Policy, Research and Campaigns of Oxfam India. Professor Jayati Ghosh is with us. Vineet Goenka, Secretary for Centre for Knowledge and Sovereignty, is also with us, as is senior journalist Pooja Mehra. Now, let me go across to Professor Jayati Ghosh first. Rising inequality is clearly a reality, but when you look at these numbers, Professor Ghosh, do you find them particularly shocking? 9 Indians, not 9%, 9 individual Indians have more wealth than 600 crore Indians?
Yes, these are shocking numbers, but unfortunately, we've heard shocking numbers like this the previous year and the year before that. Thank heavens Oxfam is bringing this to our attention. But I think now we have to move beyond outrage and start doing something about it.
Absolutely.
And the Oxfam report actually makes a very strong case for a wealth tax and an inheritance tax. It's absolutely amazing that in India, unlike many other Asian countries and many other developed and developing countries, we don't have either of these. We used to have them, we have dropped them, and we never really implemented them properly. There's a very, very strong case for putting a very small tax, less than 1% even, on wealth, and a reasonable tax, say 20-30% on inheritance, which would actually cover about 1/3 of our tax revenues already, just on the top billionaires that have been described here. And there's huge potential then for actually providing the public services that our population needs. So I think this is a massive missed opportunity. It's time that we used our outrage to actually insist on change.
All right, Ranu Bhogal, tell us a little more about this particular recommendation that the report makes. The report talks about how perhaps taxing is going, the process of taxing is looking in the wrong areas, that consumer taxes actually put a greater burden on the poorer. And we're not looking at wealth taxes, inheritance taxes, property taxes in the way in which perhaps we could to augment government spending.
Yeah, so building on what Professor Ghosh is saying, our taxation system is extremely regressive. 68% of our tax revenue, that is center and state combined, is from indirect taxes. And indirect taxes actually hit the poor, the middle classes the most. And absolutely the point we are making is that there is a case for having inheritance tax, there is a case for actually having higher corporate taxes. There is a lobby that has been lobbying for lowering corporate taxes and saying that this will boost businesses and generate more employment, which is not true. The effective tax rates that the corporates pay is much less. It's around what the you see globally. So our recommendation is, one, of course, have more progressive tax. Two, you have to increase the tax base. Three, you have to check tax dodging and tax avoidance. We heard about Panama Papers, Paradise Papers. So all these, so it's a set of policy measures and designing a taxation system which generates greater revenue for education and health, especially education and health and social services.
Now, Vineet Goenka, give us the government perspective on this, because in election year, how much of a priority is it going to be to bridge this kind of income gap that we're talking about? I mean, these are really shocking numbers. We haven't probably, stayed on them for as long as we ought to have done, because we've kind of gone into the recommendations straight away. But the fact that the report talks about how India's GDP has grown between 7 and 8%, but the richest have increased their wealth by a whopping 40% at the same time. When we're talking about lack of proper access to health, sanitation and education, can a super rich tax, which is what is being recommended, actually bridge this kind of gap? And is this something that the government would even consider?
So my answer is on three parts. One, about the report. Two, the contents of the report and my personal opinion about that. And three is what the current government would have done and has done and should have done. So A, this kind of report cannot be taken seriously because we do not know their procedures, their methodologies, there is no historical data being provided, there are no anecdotes, there was no year on year, what happened in 2011, what happened in 2019, that is not there. Are the same individuals getting richer and richer? Are the same companies getting richer and richer? What are the policies impacting that? So the entire report is a hush-hush and I do not personally take it very seriously. Having said so, the credibility is not there in that report, A. B, let me yet say, let us go by the content and for a minute presume that what has been said is right, that some individuals are getting richer and there are reasons for worrying for us. Now here in this particular case, we have to see the historical reason. They have the capital which was always with them. For reasons they have been implementing that, they have been growing on that particular capital. Now there is no reason to deliberately slow down the circle of investment in a country and make them poorer so that they can't have more wealth. But we should remember one thing. If the capitalists grow there, then we also have job opportunities. Yes, it is rightly said we should have some portion of tax more on the rich and less on the poor. But the argument floated that indirect taxes hit the poor very lightly. Please tell me, what are the taxes? Where are the taxes being implemented? Is the essentials being taxed here? So let me tell you, majority of the portion is below the poverty line who will not pay taxes, neither on the indirect taxes also, because the pulses, the food and the medicines which they take are not being taxed. And the things which are luxury, they are being taxed. Do you see a poor buying an iPhone, or do you see a poor buying a car? So I think this is flawed argument that indirect taxes hit the poor more. Indirect taxes are on luxury items, not on essentials. If you see GST, it has subsumed many taxes and that rationalization happened. Let me give you two figures and which I don't see in this report, and that's why I call this report to be non-credible. 2013, the per capita income was 74,920 rupees. 2018, per capita income became 1,13,000 rupees. If you see the number of vehicles which were then 2013,
let's take some of those.
1,77,93,701. In 2018, it was 2,49,000,000. 72,000.
Okay. 3 points, and already
See, let me
I
complete.
see a lot
So,
of
that data tells me
rebuttals coming
that
your
there
way
is
on that. So I
three.
will come back to you and let you finish all your other points.
minute,
But
one minute.
let's just get a response, because these are, for our viewers' sake, let's take these up one by one.
And more than this, we should have taken the report of H.K. Khan committee report, which is credible and done by Indian government.
I agree with what Vineet Goenka is saying.
Yes.
Oxfam report is globally seen as controversial. Their methodology has been questioned, and I would question it, because from the
It does not have any kind of credibility.
May I please finish my point? Because they exclude all kinds of income, and they exclude from assets. They take things such as education loans or consumption loans, as they remove that, whereas for a large section of the middle income people in India, that's an investment. If you're taking an education loan to send your children to school or for higher education, it's an investment which will reflect in higher incomes for your next generation. So I do have issues with the methodology, but that apart, even the NSSO's consumption data surveys, the data that comes out of it, the very dated data that comes on income, the very dated data that comes on wealth, all of that does show that over a period of time, inequality has been a problem for India, and it's only worsening. And there are economic reasons for it, which Vineet Goenka explained. When you have people who are very rich in a country, and there is a lot of they inherit capital, naturally they grow richer and richer, and when you're calculating incomes of the poor in this way, your inequality does appear to worsen.
Okay, what we didn't hear Vineet Goenka talk about at all was the issue of a super rich tax at all.
Exactly. There I agree with the Oxfam report. I do think it was a big mistake in 2015 to remove the wealth tax. I do think the wealth tax should be reintroduced. And I don't think if there is a concern about shortage of capital for investments, you can exclude the capital part, any wealth that anybody is investing to set up a factory, to set up assets which is going to produce or create jobs, that can be excluded from the calculation for wealth tax.
Fair enough. But having said that, Anu Bhogal, I think, we do need to give you a chance to actually explain the methodology and respond to Vineet Goenka's points about why he feels this report is not credible.
So, the methodology is something that is available for people to read, and, it's great detail. We explain the methodology. We use data which is recent. It is Credit Suisse data. It is Forbes billionaire list data. We have several data sources. For India, we have the NFHS data, and we are not creating data ourselves. This data is out there for everybody to use. We are only analyzing the data that is available. And I want to bring the attention back to inequality.
Yeah.
In our country, a Dalit woman lives 14.7 years less than an upper caste woman. A poor child is 3 times more likely to die before his or her first birthday. You look around yourself, don't you see inequality glaring? Inequality all around ourselves. Even in a city like Delhi, I live in South Delhi, and there are pockets in South Delhi that don't get water, that don't get electricity, poor sanitation. This infrastructure is crumbling. We have great, these flyovers and roads, but at the same time, you go slightly inside the city and you have huge garbage dumps, broken roads, broken system. So, coming back to education and health, again, RTE is 10 years old. We have not the Right to Education Act, which was passed by the Parliament.
Right.
12% school comply to RTE. Another data I can give you on inequality, government's own education system, the Kendriya Vidyalayas, per child they spend 27,000 rupees as compared to 3,000 per child in other government schools. What kind of quality do you expect?
Right.
And this is about the education system. You go back to health, 70% of health seeking is through private providers.
Okay, let's just focus on health, since you bring it up. Now, the report talks about how that 0.5% tax for the super rich could actually fund, increase health funding by a whopping 50%.
Yeah.
Now, most medical insurance schemes, including the new Ayushman Bharat, actually fails to cover outpatient cases that account for 68% of expenses. Now, India boasts of this sort of world-class health services at low cost right now. But in terms of quality and accessibility of healthcare of its own citizens, it ranks 145 among 195 countries.
Absolutely.
So, at the end of the day, this super rich tax could actually make a world of difference, according to you.
Yes, absolutely. So the public spending on health is just 1.3% of the GDP.
Yes.
We have huge shortage of doctors. you know, forget cities like Delhi. The moment you move to tier 2, tier 3 cities and rural areas, they are dysfunctional systems. The public health system is in shambles. We have the Ayushman Bharat, the predecessor was the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, and it was misused. Firstly, it is not primary health care. It is about hospitalization and whatever. You may have 50,000, you may have 5 lakhs. That's used up because it's private service providers who kind of provide those services and rapidly use up that money, do unnecessary tests, unnecessary surgeries,
right.
and the families are pushed back into poverty because they have to then spend a lot more out of pocket. So it's a policy that's not right for the poor, and I think universal health coverage is what the state should commit itself to. And you know, people talk of targeted health services, but I believe that health services should be available for each and every citizen.
Okay, I believe Professor Jyoti Ghosh also had a point to make. Go ahead.
Hello, are you asking me?
Yes, yes.
Yes. No, I just wanted to come in on 2 things. One is on the methodology, which is all available online in an appendix. So it's not something that they are hiding at all. Yes, it is true that it's difficult to measure net wealth, but that's difficult to measure incomes, and we're doing it all the time, and we're making all kinds of assumptions when we measure GDP. Net wealth, there is no country in the world that doesn't measure net wealth without looking at the debt portfolios as well. And yes, even if you're investing in education, you still have to repay your debt. So that net wealth calculation is a perfectly reasonable one, which is done the world over, and it's a perfectly acceptable one as well. There's nothing particularly wrong about it. Now, the issue is something else. And of course, wealth varies depending on the stock market, all of those kinds of issues. I'm leaving those things out. The critical thing is that stark numbers like this actually suddenly remind people how terrible the inequality is. It's something you get inured to otherwise. And it also reminds people that the solutions are really quite evident and obvious. A wealth tax, an inheritance tax, just getting rid of all of the exemptions that there are for corporate tax. I'm not even asking for a rise in the corporate tax, just get rid of the exemptions, which is what the Kelkar committee had suggested way back. If we do that, we already have a massive improvement in tax revenues, which can actually fund a much better universal, good quality public health system. It can fund proper education for our children. It can fund decent public education and scholarships for disadvantaged young people. It can fund more public jobs, which are needed to improve the quality of life and go some way into resolving our employment crisis. So we are really losing hugely by not taking advantage of this massive opportunity that all this wealth provides us with.
Goenka, is
now,
that,
you know, the trouble is we get an Oxfam report and we get excited about this. May I just make one point?
Yes.
And then we forget about it. When the budget is presented, we don't first ask, is there a wealth tax? Is there an inheritance tax? What are they doing about corporate tax?
Well, perhaps this is the best moment to ask those questions, given that, you know, we appear to have a full-fledged budget likely this year as well, not just a vote on account as is normal during election year. Vineet Goenka, is this something that, you know, the government is even willing to look at, a wealth tax, you know, an inheritance tax, or looking to do away with exemptions in corporate taxes?
Well, I was talking that time when you gave me an opportunity, and I was able to only point out one point. So let me take the second point, which I'll complete that and I'll come to this particular question. So in the 70 years of our independence, we saw there were many faulty decisions been taken, but I would like to give some credit to this particular government, which has taken right decisions in the last 4 years. I'll quote one report, which is very credible report, H.K. Khan report, which talked about banking access. India, 32% of the Indians only had the banking access in 2006. Then there was, you know, Kasturi Ranjan report, which asked about how do you give access to banks. But from 2006 to 2014, the government chose not to look at that report. But in 2014, the current regime looked at the report, and then the banking access was given. Jan Dhan account was one of the best example in the world where, you know, banking access was given to the poor and the have-nots. Let me give you another part. You know, the poverty, one of the reasons of poverty is not having education. One of the panelists made it here. And I also congratulate the current government, which gave 10% reservation to the non-social backward people. So that, you know, Christians, Muslims, and the other people who don't fall in the social backward community can get access to, you know, education.
Okay, so you're bringing up that very...
entrepreneurial, that will make them more better situation.
Okay.
Third, let me complete. You know, the third one, to nip the corruption, to bring in transparency, the Aadhaar linking, 75,000 crore plus maybe probably, I don't know the amount, how much has been sent because of direct benefit transfer. That's where the leakage has been clipped. And I would like to give that credit to them that they have curbed it. You see the inflation, it has come down from 11.4% to 4%.
Okay.
No government could do that.
Having said that, I think we got the gist of that
Because
long
last
litany of
point.
positives.
22nd
Yes.
December 2013, a credible
Yes.
newspaper of India. Let me make just one point. Times of India make a report where it was shown Sonia Gandhi is richer than the British Queen Elizabeth. But this name is absent in this particular report.
So she should pay her taxes, and we're actually we're focusing.
Times of India has a credibility.
Okay. All right. Wide range of issues over there. But yes, I believe Ranu Bhogal, you had a point to make.
Well, I mean, several points. One is about, I think the point
No,
about
the report
banking.
does not have a credibility.
Yes,
That's the reason I
please
made
let
this
her
point.
finish. Let her finish,
May I
Vinit
make
Goenka.
the point, Mr. Goenka?
We did not interrupt you. We did not interrupt you. Okay.
So
I'll
this-
only have time for last comments. So
report
let's
does not have any credibility.
let's
I
keep
would
this
go by
focused.
HK
Let's remember 93% of our workforce is in the informal sector. I'm sorry, I can't talk like this.
All right, please carry on.
The report does not have any historical
You have to mute
data.
him.
All right,
This is
Vinit
completely
Goenka,
flawed
we
report.
didn't
You
interrupt
want
you.
to take on
We
page
didn't
number
interrupt you,
69.
Vinit Goenka. Please let Ranu Bhogal speak now.
So one is
This
about
report has
Jan
all
Dhan
these columns.
accounts.
I can show that. If you
Because
give me
we
10
work
seconds,
in
I can
rural
show you every
areas.
page
I
of
have a
column.
fairly good idea that the Jan Dhan accounts have no money except when demonetization happened. Some people diverted their money through their servants and staff, and those Jan Dhan account got some money in them. But otherwise, they don't have money. 93% of our workforce is in the informal sector. They really need public services. Women suffer the most. We have not talked of unpaid care work. Women, the workforce participation rate of women has gone down to 27%, lowest in the world. So, these are issues that the government should be really looking at. Women don't have assets. There is whole lot of issues that could be addressed. High level of indebtedness. You are talking of loans for taking cars and taking educational loans. On the other hand, you have farmer distress and farmer suicide. So let's look at things in the whole perspective of this country, and not just this very limited kind of a middle class perspective of the issue.
So, Pooja Mehra, let's just talk about that one point, about the middle classes and their sort of rising aspirations, and that a lot of liabilities are created which perhaps do not get sort of factored in. But this is, the argument we heard, that this is in a way insurance or investment rather for the future. Is that something that is sort of then being ignored by this report?
Yeah, I think to the best of my knowledge, the way I understand it, they are not taken as investments. They're just netted out of all assets of the middle class. And that is a methodological problem that has been pointed out in the Oxfam report worldwide. At the same time, I just wanted to add one point to what Vinit Goenka was saying. I mean, if really the government is so serious about poverty alleviation and reducing inequality, why do we not even have a decision on what the poverty line for India is?
Yeah,
before this government was, immediately after this government was sworn in, C. Rangarajan gave in his report, and the whole decision had to be taken because questions were had been raised by Gujarat Chief Minister.
Let Vinit Goenka respond to that, and then Jayati Ghosh, I'll be coming to you for last comments. Vinit, very quickly, I'm completely out of time.
Yeah, so I was interpreter. Let me tell you what this government has done, and I like that point. And internationally, it was also appreciated. 6 crore gas connections given. The lady of the house.
You've gone through the entire.
We can talk about
your entire list.
Handouts are not.
Okay, no handouts. Yeah, as Pooja Mehra points out.
You're a very neutral
What
journalist.
are you doing about education and health? Tell us.
Absolutely. Okay, Professor
I'm sure
Ghosh,
you're a neutral
Professor
journalist who would like
Ghosh,
me to make my point.
Professor
Then
Ghosh,
if you don't
very
allow me
last
to speak,
comments
then,
to you. How
audience-
seriously do we need to take this report and its recommendations? I'm completely out of time here.
I think the essential point this report makes is absolutely valid, that there is very large and significantly increasing inequality in India, and in fact it's actually a shocking level of inequality. Second, that there is a huge potential to do something about it, and particularly to tax the rich, the wealthy, in a way that will ensure resources to provide essential public services that we have done an appalling job of providing to our people. This is a message that goes beyond political parties. It goes beyond whichever government happens to be here now for the next few months or the next few years. It is a message that we need to take a position on in general for citizens to ask of any government. And I do wish Mr. Goenka would realize that it's not only about him and his party and his government. And he has to stop trying to defend that at every point.
All right. These numbers weren't created in the last 4 years. It's important to remember that, I think, as we do slip into a very quick break here on NDTV. Thank you all for watching Reality Check tonight.